Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the licensing meeting. This meeting is being live streamed, and should we hit any technical difficulties, the meeting will be paused while reconnections are made. Do we have any apologies or substitutions?
No, Chairman, everybody's here.
And do we have any declarations of interest? And are you happy for me to sign the minutes as a true record? Does everybody have any comments on the record, on the minutes? Very much. Just one brief chairman's announcements. I would like to welcome Hannah Walker. She'd like to give everybody a wave. She's our new Democratic Services Officer, and she'll be taking over licensing in the fullness of time. Thank you very much indeed for that. And now we'll move on to Stuart, which is agenda item. Apologies, I've had to borrow Councillor Austin's glasses today because for some reason I have left mine at home. I never leave home without glasses. So poor Councillor Austin can't see anything and I can't see much. So apologies all round. And now if I could pass the message, we'll hand you over to you, Stuart, for the review.
Thank you, Chair. As set out in the report, this report sets out the statutory fees that East Cambridgeshire District Council is required to charge for specific licences under the Licensing Act 2003 and the Gambling Act 2005. And it also sets out the fees for the period 2023 to 2024 in respect to those licences and licensing related activities where the authority has a discretion to determine the relevant fees. So this is includes things like hackney carriage and private hire licensing and animal licensing and a few others as well. Okay, so I'll come to the recommendations after, but obviously most members sat around the table have heard me go through this report obviously previous years, but essentially with the exception of statutory fees set by central government, the council is responsible for setting fees and charges for licensing regulations in its locality. There's no statutory duty on the council to consult when setting or revising fees, with the exception of those to hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and private hire operator licenses, which is done under Section 70 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. And there is a set procedure for that if we ever wanted to increase those. So the committee's legal authority to agree the recommendations is based on a specific range of legislation, and that's in Appendix 7 for members to review if they want to. Due consideration must also be given to relevant case law. And members are advised that officers have considered these requirements when compiling the report. So the council's fees and charges may be challenged for a number of routes. There can be complaints to the local government ombudsman or via a judicial review. Due to this, we do review them on an annual basis. There's no obligation to increase them or decrease them or in any way, but we do have to look at them on an annual basis. Consequences are set out in famous case of Hemming's case, which involved sex shop licensing in Soho and Covent Garden, and really illustrates when things aren't done right, how it can be quite a costly affair to the council and to licence holders. It is also important with licensing fees to look at each regulatory power separately. In simple terms, this means that we cannot charge more than we recover from taxi drivers, for instance, to help pay the fees for animal welfare. So we have to look at every revenue stream sort of separately in that way. And it also needs to reflect that not all costs that we incur can be recovered. We cannot charge a fee for charity house-to-house and street collections, for instance. And there are other sort of general costs as such within the authority that we can't look to recover. So essentially, it's never going to be possible to recover 100% of the budget that's set on an annual basis. But every year when we go through and we do the review, generally what we find is around about 80% is a figure that we do try to recover, and that's justifiable. Now, table 1 under paragraph 4.3 sets out like a rolling 3-year period, because we tend to try and look at a rolling 3-year period because it obviously takes out the peaks and troughs and gives you a better average. And you'll see there that the average sort of across the board was 79.59% of our time as being recoverable. And there's individual breakdowns there as to see. So you can see just at a glance, I won't go through all of them, but Licensing Act 2003 at 24.45% of our time, and taxes at 31.67%. Collectively, that's all types of taxi licensing as being our main two areas of work resource sort of commitments in this rolling 3-year period. Okay, moving on to paragraph 4.4. This is the income on the rolling 3-year period, and that's in table 2. And you can see there that expenditure for the department has increased, and obviously income has dropped. One of those where it's dropped was obviously as a direct result of COVID, and the impacts that the service had from hospitality and transport and all those areas shutting down due to the lockdowns, etc. that we had. The 22-23 budget has been set at approximately 280, and income for the first 6 months of the 22-23 year period is £106,927, which is positive news. It shows that there are sort of signs of obviously recovery. The proposed budget for running the service in 23-24 has not yet been set, but it's expected to be in the region of 295,000, and therefore a cost recovery figure will be around 236, basing on around the 80% mark. Now, table 3 in 4.7, this basically shows income in each area of licensing against estimated budget taken from the above table. And the ones that are highlighted, you'll see are sort of negatives. The main sort of ones picking out would be the Gambling Act, and you'll see breeding there, and the animal welfare ones are generally down, and obviously taxi licensing is also down as well. Okay, so moving on to the sort of conclusion of all these figures, really. Members are obviously very much aware, as officers are, but the last few years have been very turbulent. Society as a whole has been dealing with the pandemic, and obviously in 2022 we've seen unprecedented levels of inflation driven by the impacts of recovery from COVID, but also as an indirect result of the ongoing Ukrainian-Russian conflict, which has seen the price of all types of energy increase significantly. The cost of living crisis, as it's being referred to, is impacting on all types of license holders as well as the licensing authority itself. Businesses are seeing profit margins squeeze at a time when many are struggling to get back on their feet following the lockdowns. The licensing authority itself is due to see projected operational increases of over 5% moving forward, due to sort of wage increases and material costs and various other sort of costs which we incur. So on that 3-year rolling period, I've alluded to it already, but the 3 main areas of licensing that appear to not be covering their costs is taxi licensing, animal welfare licensing, and gambling. Now, taxi licensing and animal licensing were last adjusted in 2018, and the gambling ones were set back in 2007. Gambling fees are subject to statutory maximums and statutory fees, and therefore they cannot be raised any higher than the levels that they're currently set at. The impact of that just basically means that any shortfall in that area has to be borne by the council. It goes into that, into what we can and what we cannot recover. Taken as a whole, animal welfare licensing costs the authority in last year approximately £10,000 more than we recover. And taxi licensing also costs the licensing authority approximately £10,000 more than we recover. With the taxi shortfall almost entirely coming from the driver aspect of the income streams, not the vehicles and operators. But for different reasons, the shortfall in taxi fees has been the result of a reduction in driver numbers through the COVID period, an increase in legally required tasks that have to be conducted on the remaining drivers. They're things that the government has stated we now have to do, things like tax checks, right to work checks, and other things that we now have to do. And also there's been a forced change of knowledge test provider, which means that our fees currently are £20 for a knowledge test resit, but everyone's costing us 32. due to the change of provider, which was forced upon us. It wasn't something we obviously chose to do. The old software became obsolete. The shortfall in animal welfare fees is due to underestimating the level of work that would be involved when setting the initial fee levels back in 2018, when the new 2018 regulations were established. The level of work involved in applying the new DEFRA standards is far higher than the pre-18 regulations required, especially when dealing with new applicants. So whilst we have seen large increases in the level of animal license numbers, it's kind of only served to increase the budget shortfall, because if we're not recovering costs, the more we do, we're not recovering even more cost, if that makes sense. Okay, so good news now as such is that in early 2022, the licensing authority was approached by a large taxi operator looking to relocate their existing licensing operation to East Cambridgeshire District Council. And whilst these applications have only just started to be received, as in October 22 was when we received the first ones, it's estimated that once the migration of their licenses has been concluded, which will happen over the next 3 years as their licenses at their host authority at the moment expire, that's when they're looking to relicense here. And that will bring in approximately 43 to 50,000 and potentially more than that, but that's just on the initial figures that they gave us of the numbers they're expecting us to handle. We are hoping that that income will provide for a further member of the licensing team, because we will not be able to absorb that level of work without another member of the team. But it's hoped that there'll also be some revenue left over from that income required for the new staff member, that will obviously feed into the revenue streams and reduce driver deficit that was mentioned in 5.4. That assumption doesn't factor in continued inflationary factors and any deficits or other world issues that arise, obviously, in that 3-year period. So it's with a degree of trepidation, I suppose. Okay, the levels of fee increase required to meet the cost recovery in taxi and animal welfare licensing at this time is likely to stifle economic recovery and could actually result in further reductions in overall income as a result of losing license holders. It's true that some areas of licensing have seen small recoveries in license numbers. The authority has lost 5 animal welfare license holders in 2022 as they chose not to renew. And all indications are that animal boarding and dog breeding activities will decline over the coming 12 to 24 months as the cost of living crisis results in higher overheads, fewer holidays being taken, and the desire to purchase and pay for the upkeep of puppies becoming less desirable than it was during the COVID period, when obviously it was all in, as we know, and as I've reported previously, there was a massive demand and very low supply. Well, that's not the case now. It's almost reversed. It's also worth noting that another risk of license fees appearing to those operating licensable businesses to be too high is that the individuals could be driven underground, which results in higher enforcement costs and resourcing needs, which in turn creates larger deficits and commences a vicious cycle that helps no one and arguably, you know, is counter intuitive to our council's objective of promoting business as a whole. So to conclude, whilst it's entirely justifiable to increase taxi driver and animal welfare fees by over 25% at this time to get to cost recovery, we do think that would be counterintuitive. The decision on how to proceed remains entirely for members to determine, but officers have set out a number of options below in 5.9 for members' consideration. And they are, and you'll see them there, first one, increasing taxi driver fees where a knowledge test is required to incorporate that higher knowledge test fee. And that's in column A of Appendix 6. So it's just simply the fees remain as they are, but just with the knowledge test to get back to cost recovery. Increase taxi and animal welfare fees by a nominal amount to move towards cost recovery, as we've done similarly in previous years, and reflect the additional costs incurred in new animal welfare operators, column B in Appendix 6, as well as set out in Appendix 5. And increase taxi and animal welfare fees to full cost recovery, which is column C in Appendix 6, and as set out in Appendix 5. Or instruct officers to amend any of the above options to reflect your thoughts. So that's my report, Chair. I'm obviously available for questions.
Stuart, does anybody have any questions for Stuart? Oh, I think Councillor Inskip just about beat you to it, Councillor Ambrose Smith. So over to you first, Mark.
Yeah, just a couple. So you talked about we've lost 5 animal welfare licence holders in 2022. Out of how many, is just to understand a bit of the context?
Yeah, so we have around about 70, close to about 70.
Yeah. 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 And the other bit I didn't quite understand was in the so you talked about the shortfall on taxi fees, and part of that obviously was you talked about the increased cost for this change in the test provider. But I'd have thought the other element you mentioned, reduction in driver numbers, doesn't that reduce the workload as well? Doesn't that sort of account for itself?
It does reduce the workload to a degree, but it doesn't. Part of the costs which we have, if we're running it like a business, is you have your fixed costs and you have your variable costs, and we still have to incur all of those fixed costs, which are all the service back charges, etc., for legal support, IT support, license fees that we have to pay for, the software we use, and all of those things. So what you end up with if you reduce the numbers is the economies of scale start to diminish, and as much as yes, you have slightly less work, it's not proportionate to the level of income that you lose by losing drivers. For every 10 drivers we lose nearly £2,000 of income. We don't benefit by that in the time it takes, because we've still got those costs we have to pay, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions, Mark? Councillor Ambrose Smith.
I'm quite surprised that there's a statutory limit on gaming and so on. It seems to me that's sort of encouraging pernicious behaviour. Are you aware if there's any sort of government intentions to look at this again? 2005 is somewhat, was it 18 years ago? Seems a long period of time, the scale of things.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I say with the gambling side, it was 2007. With the Licensing Act, it was 2005. I am aware that the government and the Home Office are looking at the Licensing Act fee levels to review those. I think initially they are looking only at temporary event notice fees, but they are then going to look at the fee levels of, for all of the other areas, because like you say, that it was £190 to apply for a Band B property in 2005, and it's still £190 to, you know, so yes, I completely understand. Yes, they are looking at it, but I think anything that they're only just starting to look at it now. So I think we're looking potentially that any of those fees will not really come into effect for us until at the earliest the 24-25 period, and they haven't even mentioned the Gambling Act 2007. So yeah,
it seems to come under the booze and fags sort of heading, doesn't it? Almost, you know, taxing sort of.
Yeah. We're quite fortunate. As much as we've got a deficit in gambling, we have a small number from some of the meetings I've gone to. You know, if we were in a kind of North Norfolk kind of, you know, Hunstanton seaside area, some of the losses are actually far higher. And you know, and again, we're quite fortunate here in that, you know, our Licensing Act fees generally float around cost recovery, even though they are a statutory which we can't change. They generally are within £1,000 or £2 of where they need to be. But I do know from going to meetings that some councils are reporting £40,000 or £50,000 deficits. Now we do get odd ones where we get £70 or £100 of an application fee, and it costs us probably £2,500, which is what we saw earlier this year with an unprecedented level of objection. But they are very much in the minority and are absorbed over the course of a 3-year period. We wouldn't want them every day of the week.
Well, thank you for that answer.
I think we have Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Harries.
Thank you, Chair. In 5.6, you say there's a large taxi operators relocating their existing. I thought, you know, taxis are sort of fairly fixed. They're either where they are or they're not where they are. So could you explain how the relocation occurs? Does it mean that we're going to have a lot more taxis in East Cambs, and could it affect other taxi operators?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hackney carriages are restricted to a degree to where they're issued because they're public hire, and they'll go and sit on the ranks, and they can only apply for hire within their home district. Now, there is case law which says that they can also do private hire work out of their home district. And then what this company does is private hire work. So they're a private hire operator. They work specifically in the social care and education area of private hire work, which used to be contract exempt, but is no longer contract exempt. And they will be, getting children to school, getting vulnerable adults to health and well-being type meetings and appointments. So that's the sort of work they do. They've already got that work, and all they've decided is that rather than having all of their operation nationally through one authority, is that they wish to have a local, regional sort of outlook to how they're doing things. And they felt that the way we do things here aligned with their sort of values and needs. And essentially the turnaround times that we have, which is, at this moment in time, you can get a driver's license in probably 3 weeks, 2-3 weeks. I've been to meetings where I've heard reports that some authorities are taking 6 or 7 months to issue driver licenses. So they came to see us, like I say, earlier in the year. They were keen to get up and running. We got everything in place and started to accept their applications in October 2022. They're looking at migrating around 100 drivers and 100 vehicles over the next 3 years, as and when their existing host authority ones expire. So it enables us to build up to it and absorb it as we go, and adjust our staffing accordingly, which is obviously helpful. But they're also expanding. So a number of the drivers that we've accepted from them so far are actually new drivers who, so we are looking probably at the end of the 3-year migration period that we won't have 100, we may have 150 to 175 coming across, but they will not really have a massive impact on our existing trade, because they've already got the contracts through Suffolk County Council and other county councils and other government bodies as such for that work. All it is a back office operation that they're moving away from one authority and bringing to another. And as for can they do that? Absolutely. When they're private hire, they can have their private hire base here with their vehicles and their licenses here, and they can do work anywhere in the UK.
So I think we congratulate you on producing an efficient system that encourages people to come to use transport more efficient than
Councillor Webber.
Oh, just a quick question, Stuart, about the animal boarding and dog breeding activities. If people decide not to relicense, can see not relicense, do we then do some sort of follow-up to ensure that then they haven't sort of gone underground, because that's the ongoing question, isn't it? If they're still doing it in a smaller way, but not deciding not to license.
So whenever we get any of our license holders who don't renew, then we will push them through to my officer Lynn, and we will continue to monitor advertising and things like that to see if there is activity still occurring, and obviously if there is, then we'll take action on that. Generally speaking, the people who have said they're not going to do it haven't so far. They were perhaps people who explored doing it whilst COVID was there, and they just found that it wasn't maybe as profitable as they thought, etc. But no, we do have those safeguards in place.
Thank you, Stuart. Do we have any other questions for Stuart before we move to debate? Okay, so right, committee. We need to decide what we're going to do. Yeah, I think. How are the committee feeling about this? I have to say, I personally feel that under the circumstances, I don't want to drive animal welfare underground. I think the taxi trade are already under the cosh, and I don't really want to impose anything else on the taxi trade at this stage. I don't know how the rest of the committee feel, but personally, I would be moving towards doing nothing at this stage and waiting and seeing how things develop, and perhaps bringing this back and looking at it again next year to see whether or not this is the right. It would be a better time to look at trying to recover costs. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. Councillor Jones.
Just a little clarity on your bit. When you said not increasing, are you still looking to take the extra £12 suggesting on that one, or not?
See, I could be talked into that. I could be talked into that, because I think that is possibly a justifiable a recovery, because it's something that's been forced on us. It's not that we, but again, I could be persuaded out of that. If you're starting, we've already lost taxi drivers. If we're now starting to want to encourage new taxi drivers, if they've got to pay an additional £12 for a knowledge test, I don't know, but I will be entirely led and guided by the rest of the committee on this one. I think we need to go with the majority on it. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Simon and Alan.
Councillor Harries.
I would certainly be inclined to go along with that, in that time's very hard for small businesses of any kind. And on the one hand, we want them to know not only that we're not going to make their lives more difficult, but that we are sensitive to how they operate, and we're listening to them and understand what it's like. But obviously, at the same time, council finances around the country are under huge pressure, and there clearly is a balancing act to be carried out here. I would always be inclined to follow Stuart's recommendations, because he understands in much greater depth than any of us precisely how to manage this. So my inclination is to do little or nothing, possibly to look at the £12, which is reasonable. Taxi drivers will understand that this is something that is absolutely out of the council's hands, and therefore might be able to swallow that if they feel that the council itself is not trying to penalise them and claw money back. But I definitely am concerned about the next couple of years for the council itself. So, I mean, Stuart, what your recommendation here? I've gone through Appendix 6, column B, and you do suggest a minor rise, if I read it correctly. Can you interpret that for us?
Yeah, essentially, back in 2015, when I came in, the amount we were recovering from our fees compared to how much it was costing us, I think we were recovering around half of what we're doing. I mean, a decision was then made, if we went to cost recovery in its entirety, that we wouldn't take the trade with us, and it would be unrealistic after seven or so years of no increases to suddenly almost double the cost of every single license we issued. So the decision then was made to have an elongated sort of stepped increase to achieve that over that sort of period of time, and that prior to COVID is what we'd done, and we'd got back to, for 1 year, I think we actually did get back to about 80%. Now that column B really is kind of saying, well, should we do that again? And that's what the halfway house is on the animal welfare side of things as well. Is it saying, well, should we look at stepping that increase over the next 3 to 5 years to sort of get back to that point? Now, obviously, column A is just purely the £12 for which is only going to affect new applicants, and it is a one-off hit, so it's not an ongoing thing for all renewals, etc. Moving forward. So that's very much the least that officers were sort of wanting to try and recover, because as you rightly say, councillor, it is something that it's a fixed cost to us. We have no choice. It just means every applicant coming through who has to do that knowledge test will cost us £12. And it's unfortunate, and we didn't want to have to go down that route, but we had no choice, like I say, in that. So that's where we are now. Obviously, the thing that with the deficits and stuff, and I highlighted it in the report, is that we have got this situation with the taxi side, that we've got this new company coming on board. But picking up on the point that Councillor Inskip said, that when you get more drivers, you do get inherent sort of economies of scale that start building into that as well, because those fixed costs will remain. And okay, admittedly, we're going to have to get an additional member of staff, but they're to a point it's still a fixed cost. And we know that the fixed cost of that member of staff is going to be, will provide a little bit of a buffer to that cost. So to me, the taxi side of things, I think will, because of 24/7, this company coming across to us, I think that that fee, if we're looking in a year's time, we will be closer to cost recovery on it. So it's such a difficult one, because and this is what we always say with taxi fee, it's such a movable thing, because even if we put the fees up, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get more income if people go elsewhere. But at the same time, we can only recover things which are justifiable, and that's what all of this sort of sets out. So I don't know if that's much help, other than saying, that was the idea of column B. Yeah.
Of course, yes.
I think that what you're saying suggests that thanks to the new contract in taxis, we could go column A, basically, which is to recoup the £12, make sure that this is well explained to the trade so that they understand exactly why this has to happen. But if the deficit widens for a year, we know it's going to close again after a couple of years. So the issue that really matters is in animal welfare, where, as your report explains, thanks to the additional costs, every new contract is actually losing money for the council, not gaining it. So I guess when we've had the rest of the debate, we should come back to how you want to play the because I must admit I found Appendix 5 a little bit too much for me, but if we could end up with a precise recommendation about how we're going to manage the fees for animal welfare, because I do share the concern that this might be driven underground. And I do, by the way, final point, I think we need to explain our thinking around this very clearly. It might be worth doing some kind of outreach, not so much for the taxi trade, because communication is obviously good there, but with the animal welfare industry, so that they fully understand the situation, what the council's intentions are, how you mean to support and help them stay in business. I would strongly support good communications around that. But anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. We have Councillor Sharp and then Councillor Inskip.
Thank you, Chair. Most of what I was going to say, Councillor Harris has mentioned, because I virtually agree with everything you just said. Personally, on the taxes, I think we should just increase it by that £12 knowledge test, because if you remember the last meeting or the meeting before, we had the taxi drivers here in terms of their increased fares, and we know that they're struggling for business. So I don't really want to push any more onto them. And also, as Stuart has mentioned, this new operator moving in will mitigate those costs. And similarly, so I think that's where I am on taxes, is just the £12 personally. On animal welfare, I think we should raise it slightly, but I'm very conscious of now that the market has dropped totally from what I'm hearing on costs of dogs, etc. I don't want to run the risk of pushing them too much underground, so I maybe would go for a small percentage increase.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Inskip.
So, well, I was going to say something very similar. I think it's always very difficult, because obviously if we don't recover the costs. Effectively, we're putting the burden on the sort of the council taxpayer, so it's not for free. But certainly with the the taxi trade, we know from when we were doing the fees review, they've had the issues with COVID. They've had the issues with the huge increases we've seen in fuel prices. We are a rural district where some smaller villages don't have any sort of public transport, and those that do, generally there's nothing in the evening and on a Sunday. So it is important that there is let's say a viable taxi trade to provide that alternative to people. So I'm very much with the last speakers. Then I think we should go for that minimum of just recovering that extra cost for the increased test, but not do anything else in the fees. I've got a very similar view to Councillor Sharp when it comes to animal welfare. I think we don't want to drive it underground, but it's almost a dangerous. You then say, well, let's not charge anything, or let's reduce the fees to the bare minimum. We do need to balance that with trying to recover the costs, but I think trying to do that in with a big increase this time, I think is a real risk. So I'd be happy to go with a small percentage increase, but nothing more than that, because it's clear that those the sort of breeders and so on are struggling, and I guess we know we're going to get more tax increases on Thursday, so I think we just have to be very conscious of that. And I think I'll very much agree with what Councillor Sharp just said.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. No, I might pretty much echo everybody else has said. I think I'm in favour of the £12. I don't know if Stuart could just advise. Often the local radio has been advertising one of the local taxi firms supporting about getting licences. Are they actually paying for the knowledge fee? Do you know? I don't know if you have that sort of level of knowledge.
No, in all honesty, no. We don't know where the money comes from as such, whether, we know obviously that operators have got, I just walked by one of our local operators here this morning, with their drivers required apply within. We know there's a national shortage of drivers, and operators are, sort of pulling out all the stops as such to make themselves, the one that people go to sort of, be sponsored. So it wouldn't surprise me if the operators are paying the knowledge fee. I do know with the new operator who's migrating across, they are paying because all of their drivers are employed, and they will pay that cost. I do also know that there are some initiatives through like job agencies where they can get funding to help with those fees as well.
Comments to be made? Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Just a comment about animal welfare. I think it is so important that animals are living things, and we need to ensure that we do our best to make sure that they are treated and looked after in a humane way. So I think encouraging everybody who wants to get into dog breeding or kenneling or whatever it is, they should be encouraged to set themselves up for regular inspections and complying with everything. I think that is extremely important. Thank you.
So I'm getting from the committee that we are content to increase the taxi fee just by the £12 for the increase in the knowledge test. Animal welfare, I have to say, I would be happy to do nothing at this stage. However, I have listened to what you've all said. And would we agree on a nominal increase phased over the next 12 months? And I'm talking nominal phased over the next 12 months.
That be implemented when you say phased over?
Is that possible to do that, Stuart?
What would change it?
These fees are for animal welfare would come in on the 1st of April, and it would just be when you say phased, they would literally take account when the person applies for a new license or when their renewal comes up.
Right. Okay.
So yeah. So for some people if somebody's just renewed for it and got a 3-year 5-star license, they won't obviously pay any more fees until in that way.
So it's all a question of timing then. And Councillor Harries.
Just a question to Stuart about this. I feel that if you're not going to raise the fee for animal welfare enough to make a difference to the council's finances, then it would be better just to leave it well alone, on the grounds that an increase, even if it's very small, is still psychologically an increase, and it doesn't make an awful lot of difference to the council. So it's really a question to Stuart, you know, if this committee decided not to raise the fees for animal welfare, can you manage? Would that be a problem for you, or would you cope?
It wouldn't be a problem to us. You're right in saying that if it's a nominal increase, because there's only sort of around 68 to 70 license holders, some of which are obviously they're going to be renewing over the next couple of years. So we're not going to see the instant impact of any increase, you know, tomorrow anyway. You know, then arguably you could be saying, like you say, putting things up, maybe to lose 1 or 2 license holders, it negates any gain that you've gained by putting them up. Can we cope? Yes, you know, this can be drawn out over an extended 3-year or 5-year period. Essentially, what the general guidance and when we go to the various training courses as such about fees is they're saying, you know, if there are gains more than sort of like 15-20% or losses more than 15 or 20%, then you can you know, recover that and adjust that. So, you know, and if it's ongoing, but if it is isolated to 1 year because you had a particularly difficult prosecution case or something like that, where some of those costs were you know, brought into that particular budget, then you can look at extending over a 3-year period to iron that out. So, you know, all I'm really highlighting at this point is on these last figures, and since 2018, it does appear as if we miscalculated what the costs were on newbies, really, more so than, because when they come to us, there are so many hoops to jump through to get their, you know, preventative healthcare plans in place, and all the DEFRA requirements, like the pet shop requirements, is 96 pages long, you know, for all the depending on which sort of animals you have, depends on how much work goes into those sorts of things, and it's to get them ready. So essentially what we're trying to do is get them to the point where they can, 1, have a license, 2, I suppose, have a successful business with us, but also get one of the multiple year licenses, you know, because they've got everything and they're meeting the higher standards. So, you know, that is probably what I'm saying, in that, you know, since 2018, we probably didn't set them quite where we needed to, but, you know, £10,000 seems a lot, but I suppose in a £290,000 budget, it's not entirely detrimental to our continued operation. We could continue to monitor it and look and see as we move forwards, and see what happens, you know, in that area. Because if we continue to see declining in that area of licensing, then that will have an impact, obviously, on the fees and on the income. Yeah.
I think the only thing that I'd like to say is that it has taken us an awful long time to get to where we are with recovery costs. We've come from a very low base, but we've done that over a 5-year period. What I don't want to see is year on year, those fees not being increased, but even if it's by a nominal amount, for people coming into the business, especially animal breeding, should understand the cost of coming into that business. And they will be passing that cost on to the price of a puppy or a dog. So that will get passed on. But what I don't want to see is going year on year, not increasing the prices, for us then to end up in year 5, having to then think about recovering costs yet again and starting from the very bottom. Yeah. So I totally understand the argument we've got here, but what I don't want to see is for finance to come back to us saying, right, you're not recovering the costs that you promised to. So we've got to where we've got to. I don't want to see us slipping back so that we then have to look at increasing the costs significantly, say in 2 years' time. So I think we just need to think about that as well.
I think, Chair, if looking at the table, there's a table on it's Appendix 5, page 3, if I get my teeth in. It's at the top, and so Appendix 5, page 3.
Appendix 5.
Appendix 5, page 3. 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 Appendix 5
Looking at appendix 7, sorry, Sue, your glasses are, oh, she's got another pair.
No, I'm going to do that.
Right, where are we? Yes.
So there's a table at the top of say appendix 5, page 3. And this is the impact of a nominal increase compared to the current fees. And it's for new applicants and renewal applications, 1, 2 and 3 years for each, as you can see. And it's got the existing. And so talking through this, you know, if that previous table, the nominal increase was applied, then the worst case scenario as such is a large sort of new 3-year license. Now they are rare. We don't have many new 3-year licenses because of the way the star system works. The existing people, which obviously, you know, is the bulk of obviously the 60 odd which we have, you can see there that the largest increase on a 3-year license is £51, which is about, what's that broken down, about 17, is it around £17 a year? Increase on that is what the actual impact of that nominal increase would do. Now it's an increase, and you know, but as obviously Liz just stated, you know, is it something that it's a nominal increase that takes effect from April, will only impact obviously on people as they go into those years, so it's not going to be a sudden hit tomorrow in its entirety. And obviously it does reflect the fact that the new applications do cost a bit more, but it's to me it's an easier argument because of the fact that we can justify that, because we know it costs more to get them set up, and they, I suppose, would know that once they are set up, then obviously they would drop onto the renewal fees, which are, you know, slightly less. You know, so it's just, I just didn't know if it was, you know, if there's any questions coming about table, because as you're saying, there's quite a lot of numbers there, and I didn't, you know, whether it would be useful to go through that, but that's what it really states. But a newbie the worst newbie would be £101 extra over 3 years, about £33, and £51 over a 3-year license on the other one.
Councillor Inskip, then Councillor Harries.
I was just going to say, I think the risk of doing nothing is we store up a bigger problem.
Yes, I agree.
Come back
I
in a year
agree.
or two's time and say, oh, the gap's got even bigger.
Yeah.
And then we're either faced with never really closing it or having to do something. horrendous
Drastic. Yeah,
increases.
I agree. Councillor Harries.
So I just wanted to make sure I understood all the different issues that have to be balanced out here. So first of all, the licensing team started 7 years ago in a very bad place, basically, and has year on year improved its performance, thus winning the confidence of the council as a whole and delivering to the finances of the council as expected. So any decision to freeze anything means that a problem will occur 1, 2, 3 years into the future, where you might have to impose a larger increase in order to get back to where you otherwise would be. So everything, but at the same time, we know that the animal welfare industry here is not only important, but it is suffering quite a lot. You can see that it is struggling. The numbers that have actually stopped trading are a cause for concern. And there is the fear of driving people underground. So those are the issues that we have to balance. And, you know, I would just look for a clear recommendation. What I think I've just heard from you, Stuart, is that you think the £51 increase, because when everyone is saying nominal, well, I just want you to have a number to that. So the £51 increase over 3 years for new applicants would appear to be a good balancing act. I mean, certainly, if you felt the industry was in severe crisis, then that would be an argument for freezing it, as long as the industry understands that this is a short-term fix to help them out. But if they're going to go down for £51, then there's no saving them anyway, I guess. So I would come round to follow. If this is your recommendation, then personally, I would vote for it. So there we are.
Thank you, Councillor Harries. So I think I'm summing up everything here now. I hope if I'm not, then shout. We are content with going for the £12 knowledge fee for the taxi drivers, And we are also going for the nominal increase in animal welfare. And I think anybody going into an animal welfare will be aware of the new fees, and the people who have currently got licenses with us will be aware that it is really a nominal amount, £26 every year. And as Councillor Harris so succinctly put it, if they're going to go down for £26, then as you say, there is nothing there will be nothing to save them. So if everybody's happy with that, I'm quite happy to put that forward to the vote then. Is everybody in favour? Any against or abstentions? Oh, sorry, I
Do
do
you
beg
need
your
a
pardon. Yes, I do. I'm
proposal
proposing.
seconder?
Can I have a seconder, please? Got so excited. Yeah, Councillor Webber has seconded. So we have. Can we all vote again? Do beg your pardon. So those in favour? Those against? Abstentions?
That was 10 votes in favour, no votes against and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes, I do beg your pardon. We also need to note the statutory fees on 2.1, little 1, little 2 and little 3. I am happy to propose from the chair. Do we have, and 2.2 as well. Councillor Webber to second. What do you want me to do?
So 2.2 as well, so. Little one.
Yes, 2.2, little 1 and little 2. And 2.3. 1, which is what we've just
Which is
voted
what
on.
we just
Yeah.
voted on.
So we're voting now on 2.1, 1, 2 and 3 and 2.2, 1 and 2. I'm proposing from the chair. Councillor Webber has second. Can we have those in favour, please? Anyone against? That's passed unanimously. Thank you, Stuart. And I think, do you have a report for us?
No.
An update? I think you're exhausted. We're update. There's nothing further to report. I assume.
There's nothing further. I think, to be honest, we've outlined a number of the
Yeah.
things in that feed review that's going
Yeah.
on. We're still working on the animal welfare prosecution and
Yeah.
just dealing with the day-to-day. It's incredibly busy in the licensing section at the
Yes.
moment.
And forward agenda plan. Where are we? December. Oh, CCTV and taxes. It's
Yeah,
exciting.
I'm pleased to say that
It's finally coming
in
here.
amongst everything else, I am about 95% of the way through that report.
Excellent.
It will be coming to December.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
In which case then at nearly 5 to 11, I am drawing this meeting to a close. Thank you all for attending. Those who are lucky enough to be doing the licensing subcommittee, if they'd like to remain in the chamber, and that will start as soon as we've all vacated. Thank you very much.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for attending. This is the licensing statutory subcommittee. And we are on live stream. So welcome to those members of the public and press who are watching online, and also welcome to those members of the public who are in the room today. I'm going to do a bit of quick introductions and then I'll explain what's going to happen. I'm Alan Sharp. I'm the chair of the statutory subcommittee. I'm also chairman of council. Yeah.
Gareth Wilson and a councillor for Hadnam Ward.
Lavinia Edwards, District Councillor for Borough Ward.
Caroline Evans, Senior Democratic Services Officer.
Hannah Walker, Trainee Democratic Services Officer.
Stuart Broom, Senior Licensing Officer for the council.
Maggie Camp, Director of Legal.
Angela Tyrrell, Senior Legal Assistant.
Adil Yunus, Legal Assistant.
Lynn Bagwell, Licensing Officer.
Thank you, everybody. What one point certainly is when you do come to speak, can you make sure the microphones are on? Because if they're not, they won't get picked up at all by the live stream. I will hopefully notice that they're not on and pick you up for that. This has been this licensing hearing is being held under the Licensing Act 2003, and that actually is quite specific in that it says it can only be heard by a subcommittee of 3 people, not 2, not 4. So hence why you've got three elected members here. We will hear from the applicant and the objectors, and obviously the licensing officer as well. We will, at the end of that session, we will go into private session, and we will, under the Act, the council has 5 days to issue their verdict. So it's unlikely that we're going to be issuing that today, because obviously we have to make sure the wording is appropriate, because if there is what's that? The right of appeal to the magistrates court within 21 days. So obviously we have to make sure that wording is correct. So hopefully everybody understands that. So if I can ask Stuart, the licensing officer, to set out the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Due to the fact that we are live streaming, I will be reading the report almost word for word, unfortunately. I know that obviously everybody here has. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, we have missed apologies and substitutions. Caroline, go on.
Thank you, Chairman. We've been informed of a change to the membership from the Liberal Democrat group. They've replaced their substitute, Councillor John Trapp, with Councillor Gareth Wilson. So we have apologies from Councillor Jones, and Councillor Wilson is here as a substitute.
Thank you, Caroline. And obviously, item 2 is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from members?
I'm a member of the National Trust, but that's just a personal interest.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Okay, finally, over to Stuart. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, so say, although parties here have obviously had chance to go through the report, I'm mindful that people may be viewing who haven't. So the purpose of today is to determine an application for grant of a full variation in respect of Anglesey Abbey and Lode Mill in Lode, Cambridgeshire. The premises history is that it's a venue of national historic value dating from around 1600 and built on the site of 12th century Augustinian priory run by the National Trust Enterprises Limited. The property, now known as Anglesey Abbey and Lode Mill, comprises a main house and ancillary buildings with gardens and other open land. The premise has held a premises license since the 17th of November 2005, when it was transferred under the grandfather rights provisions of the Licensing Act 2003. A copy of the existing premises license can be found at Appendix 1 to the report. The current licensable activities and timings are shown in table 1. Essentially, there are no restrictions on the opening hours. Sale by retail of alcohol for consumption on and off the premises, Monday to Sunday, 9 till midnight. Plays, live music, recorded music, performance of dance, indoors and outdoors, from 9 till 01 on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, as well as the alcohol being permitted on those times as well. Late night refreshment, which is hot food and drink, indoors and outdoors, Monday to Sunday from 11 p.m. till midnight. It's not required prior to 11 p.m. And 11 p.m. till 01 a.m. on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Now, the details of the variation being requested is that the National Trust Enterprises Limited applied for the full variation under Section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003. The application can be found at Appendix 2 to the report, and the application was served on the responsible authorities and advertised in accordance with the regulations of the Licensing Act 2003. So just to reiterate, officers are happy and satisfied that the rules of application have been followed by the applicant in its entirety. The application proposes to amend the licensing site plan to include an area of the site known as the Orchard, to add the performance of films and any activities similar to live music, recorded music, and the performance of dance to the license, to restrict the Orchard area to only permit the performance of films, live music, recorded music, and on and off sales of alcohol. That area to be used only between 1 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. And all the other hours would remain exactly the same as currently licensed. So under paragraph 3.6 of proposed licensable activities and timings would be shown. So that table, it sets out how that variation would impact on that original license, which essentially just adds those activities and adds the area to the license. Okay, opening hours would remain unrestricted. Now, during the consultation period, it was noted there was a slight anomaly on the premises plans that had been submitted by the applicant. It included a small part to, I think it would be classed as the north of the venue, that shouldn't have been included as it's not owned by the National Trust. This was rectified by the applicant. All parties were notified. It was considered a minor and non-consequential to the process, and it was rectified by the applicant within the statutory consultation period. So the application was allowed to continue. It wasn't deemed, as I say, prejudicial. The proposed plans for the premises variation can be found at Appendix 3 to the report. The licensable activity area will be within the red line, including the orchard area, which is shown in green for members on there. With the exception of the condition offered to limit the activities and times within the orchard area, the applicant has not offered any additional operating schedule conditions with regards to their variation proposals. If the variation were to be granted, the whole site would be subject to those conditions already included on the existing premises license. The existing operating schedule conditions can be found in Appendix 1 to this report. No representations were received from the statutory consultees, such as police, environmental health, fire, etc. But a total of 8 valid representations were received from other persons permitted by the Licensing Act 2003 to submit representations, and these can be found in Appendix 4 to the report. The representations all relate to the inclusion of the orchard on the premises licence and its potential for the continued use during the year as a licensable area. Concerns regarding noise and light pollution, smells from food trailers and general disturbance to local residents living in the Mill Road Lode area, which is in close vicinity to this orchard part of the National Trust site. At the time of writing the report, no agreement had been reached between the applicant and all of the objectors. Although we were aware at that point there was a meeting being held between the National Trust and local residents on the 2nd of November. The update to that was that meeting did go ahead. It was constructive, but unfortunately it didn't result in agreement. The National Trust subsequently submitted a question and answer document that has been circulated and put forward a condition that would be placed on the licence if members were to grant it. And that was that Licensable activities permitted by the license, including the sale by retail of alcohol for consumption on and off the premises, will only be authorised by the premises license in the area known as the Orchard for a maximum of 19 event days occurring between the 1st of October and the last day of February annually. In utilising these 19 event days, the licence holder shall hold no more than 14 consecutive event days, and there should be a minimum gap of 48 hours between the ending of one promoted event using event days and the commencing of another promoted event utilising event days. All licensable activities on event days will commence no earlier than 1 p.m, finish no later than 9:30 p.m. And for the avoidance of doubt, the sale by retail of alcohol and all other licensable activities will not be authorised in the orchard area of the premises licence shown in green on the plans outside of these event days. So that was what was put forward and was put to all objectors. Of the 8 who originally opposed, 2 stated that they felt that that condition satisfied their concerns and agreed they didn't feel there was a need for the hearing. But the remaining 6, we didn't hear back from 1, but the other 5 stated that they didn't feel that it was satisfying their concerns and believed that the hearing was still necessary. So that's where we're up to regarding things which have happened in the interim between the report and today. Okay. So other points to note is the Orchard has previously been authorised to undertake licensable activities by means of temporary event notices, most notably for their Winter Lights event. A single 10 cannot exceed a maximum of 168 consecutive hours duration. And at this time, they cannot hold more than 20 for 26 cumulative days per year. And they cost £21 each, must be applied for in advance of the event. For events where it is not possible to comply with the above restrictions, a premises licence would be required to be in force. So I raise that because in 2021, the National Trust did utilise the use of 10s. The existence of planning permission is not a matter for the licensing to be concerned with when determining an application. Planning are one of the responsible authorities and have not put in an objection. And as I say, just to clarify on the points of planning permission, essentially, if a license was to be in place and planning permission wasn't, then planning officers would do the enforcement. And if it was the opposite way around, then planning would be happy and we would, as licensing officers, would do the enforcement for breaches. Okay, just to clarify on that. The allowances afforded by the deregulation of certain activities would be permitted on this premises, but only whilst license or only whilst sale by retail of alcohol was authorised, which, if that new condition is attached to the licence, would be for only 19 days of the year. Okay. Conclusions and determination. Members are obliged to determine the application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives, which are the prevention of crime and disorder, the prevention of public nuisance, public safety, and the protection of children from harm. In making your decision and arriving at your decision, you're also obliged to have regard to statutory guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act and the Council's Statement of Licensing Policy. Should you depart from either, you must specify your reasons for doing so, and members must also take into account the information contained within the report and evidence submitted both written and orally during the hearing. Paragraph 4.2 is relevant statutory guidance considerations. They're in Appendix 5, and that's about applications for premises, determining applications and deregulation, etc. So that's all covered in Appendix 5. Appendix 6 is the relevant local policy considerations, representations, conditions, license and objectives, and then some more detail on those 4 objectives. But again, that's all in Appendix 6. And members can determine the premises license variation as follows: to grant the variation, to reject whole or part of the variation, or to modify the conditions of the license. And the condition is varied if it's and modified if it's altered or omitted, or a new condition is added. Members are asked to note they may not modify or impose new conditions or reject the whole or part of the application merely because they consider it desirable to do so. It must actually be appropriate to do so in order to promote the licence objectives, and any such step must relate to the actual representations made. Conditions attached must be focused on matters which are within the control of the applicant, i.e. the premises and its vicinity. No conditions may be added that restrict the permissions already permitted by the existing licence and not forming part of the variation application. Just to clarify, that's the main difference between a new application and a variation. What they have, you cannot alter. You can only alter and decide on what's before you today. Okay, and Regulation 19A requires authorities to disregard any information given by a party or person that's not relevant to their application or representation and is not relevant to the licensed objectives. In determining the premises license application, members must provide their reasons for their decisions and consider their responsibilities under the Human Rights Act 1998 when balancing the rights of the applicant and the rights of those who may be affected. A decision taken must be appropriate and proportionate to the objective being pursued. In particular, the following should be taken into consideration, which is Article 6, the right to a fair hearing. Article 8, respect to private and family life. Article 1, the first protocol, peaceful enjoyment of possessions, which can include a licence. And Article 14, the right to freedom from discrimination. The cost of convening the financial implications are that the cost of convening this subcommittee is covered by the licence fee paid by applicants. Should there be a decision to refuse whole or part of the application or modify the conditions, the applicant can appeal to the Magistrates' Court. There will be a cost associated with this process. The right of appeal is 21 days from the date of notification of the decision. Any party who's made relevant representations in relation to the application may appeal the decision. There will be costs associated with that process. The right of appeal is 21 days from the date that the notification is given. That is my report, Chair. Obviously, I'm available for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Stuart, for that. Members, any questions of Stuart at this stage? No? No. Okay. Maggie, any questions? No. Okay. Right, thank you. In which case, we'll move across to the applicant to set out their case, and if you could, as I said, speak to the microphone and give us your name as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So my name's Karen Cochrane and I'm here representing the premises licence holder. I've also got with me behind me here, Martin Beaver, who's the general manager at the site, James Rowland, who's the project manager for the event, the Winter Lights event that has given rise to this application, and also Peter Marsden, who's the designated premises supervisor and the food and beverage manager. So if there's any specific questions about the events and what happens at the site, I'll call them forward. So, as was clear from the committee report, the National Trust have applied to vary their premises licence for Anglesey Abbey and Load Mill to add the permission to show films to their current licence, because that was missing, and to extend their licensable area to include an area we've labelled as the orchard. So for clarification, there are already 28 conditions on this premises licence. We consider they are appropriate and proportionate, and of course they will remain on the licence, and should the orchard be included within the site plan, they will also apply to that area. We've already heard the current premises licence permits sale of alcohol from 9 till midnight daily, and entertainment's allowed from 9 until 1 daily. However, for the area called the orchard, those hours don't yet apply, or that's the reason for our application. We want licensable activities to be permitted there. The reason for that, the orchard was chosen as the site of the winter walk because of accessibility, for safety reasons, because when it's dark, it's the most appropriate part of the site. It's a treasured site. Less damage is likely to be done to the site by using this area. So to authorise event in previous years, temporary event notices have been submitted, and to reduce the administrative burden of submitting those forms, it was decided this year to submit a variation application. I would have, normally when I get these requests in, I'd simply put in an application to amend the plan. But in this case, it was already acknowledged by my clients that it would be sensible to have some discussions before we submitted the application. And And it was as a result of those discussions that the application was worded whereby any events in the orchard would be restricted to taking place between 1 p.m. and 9:30. So as is already mentioned in your report, and again, to be transparent, we do appreciate that if the red line was extended around the orchard, then due to deregulation, events technically would be allowed up until 11 p.m. But the Trust has been really clear all along that any events in the orchard would end by 9:30 p.m. And I think as an extremely responsible national institution, if they've said it's going to stop by 9:30, it is going to stop by 9:30. That's what they've done in the past, and that's what they will continue to do. It is extremely significant, I would suggest, and heartening that the police, the fire authority, environmental health, child protection, in fact, none of the responsible authorities have submitted a representation. They will have all received the application, and if they had any concerns, I expect today would have been their opportunity to raise them. But no comments, no concerns have been raised by what are the experts in their field. So when it became clear that there remained concerns from those living in the vicinity, the Trust arranged a meeting. They take their responsibilities really seriously, and it was really important for them to understand the concerns that were being raised. It's really important to work together. The statutory guidance makes that quite clear. And if anything, even if a resolution can't be formed, at least you can hopefully narrow down the issues. So following the meeting, they wrote to all those who'd attended, suggesting that the number of times the orchard could be used might be restricted. And as has been explained, they suggested that it shouldn't be used any more than 19 days in any calendar year, no more than 14 consecutive days permitted. It was never intended to use the orchard every day. But what they were hoping was to have some flexibility to perhaps consider the area for other events that are not yet conceived. The Winter Lights is a really significant fundraiser. Maintaining a valuable historic building is always a challenge. And the Trust today are just trying to balance the needs to fundraise with protecting the grounds, but also protecting the amenity of its neighbours. As the representations from the neighbours list similar concerns, the Trust helpfully decided to circulate an FAQ document after their meeting, which I'd refer you to. I understand you've got copies of that. So if it's available to you, I won't repeat what it says, save to say that I think those responses will be very helpful to read. I understand that some of the residents did respond to that correspondence, and they've suggested various things, one of which was perhaps that a noise condition should be added with sound levels and measurements, etc. You will be aware that one of the licensing objectives is the prevention of public nuisance. I'm no noise expert, but I am aware there is no particular decibel level that can be added on. It all depends on ambient noise levels and all sorts of other readings. I think if neighbours can hear lyrics of music being played inside their homes with their windows closed, then I think it would be sensible for there to be some sort of a noise management plan to monitor the area to ensure there's no noise nuisance. However, there's already a condition on the licence which states noise from entertainment provided at the premises to be conducted so as not to cause unreasonable disturbance to the occupiers of any adjacent premises in separate ownership and occupation. So I think there's already a condition there. If I can also add, they use acoustic music at the site. They angle the speakers. They use specialist contractors. There is a safety advisory group meeting with the local council. I know public protection are involved in that. I know that I'm presuming it's in environmental health, but public protection is certainly part of people coming out to the site. They have a snag night, so there will be officers who are experts on noise who will be there able to advise what should and shouldn't happen. But I think perhaps if there's a noise management plan that says that somebody needs to be monitoring the size, the noise at a particular site, that may be a constructive help. Again, to be transparent, the Trust could just simply apply for temporary event notices again this year. Each temporary event notice can last up to 168 hours, so that's 7 days, as has been explained. That then has to be 24 hours, but then another temporary event notice could be applied for. At the current time, you can have up to 26 days in a calendar year. I would expect that given the lack of comment from any of the responsible authorities, that those temporary event notices would probably be approved. And it was simply to avoid submitting those notifications every year that this application was requested. I've been very clear, and I've spoken to my clients today. The Trust have absolutely no intention to apply for temporary event notices in the orchard should this application be approved. They want to have a close and positive relationship with those living nearby, and they hope and believe that the restrictions suggested, so that's again between 1 p.m. and 9:30 p.m, 19 days per annum, no more than 14 consecutive days. I think that's something that could sensibly be approved today. They've heard the concerns raised and they remain confident they can work together to make the event continue to be a success. Licensing Act's a permissive piece of legislation. Applications should be approved. The reason they can say that is because of the facility to review a licence should any concerns arise. I would suggest the National Trust is a responsible licence holder. They don't want to cause any problems for their neighbours, but should there be issues in the future, the matter can come straight back before yourselves with the licence being reviewed. I understand that this event, because in effect that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the winter lights. That's what they're hoping will be authorised. The event has evolved in the past. I think there may have been issues that caused concerns previously, but they have learnt. They have amended the issues that happened previously. They've taken steps. They are a responsible operator, and I think the limitations that are being proposed are appropriate. And I would ask you if you could please grant their application this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Members, any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Wilson.
Why did you decide that it would be best to hold these events on the orchard, which is the nearest to the housing, and not further away, as the site's quite a large site?
I think it might be easier if the general manager explains it to you, if that's acceptable.
Sorry, just for the benefit of the tape, if you can say your name and then. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Martin Beaver. I'm the general manager of the site. So yeah, thank you for that question. There's kind of two key functions to it, really. The first is that it's on our winter walk, which is an area where we have sort of hard standing pavement all the way around, which is appropriate both to the event, but it also means that we can do some really wonderful things with local partners around access for people with disabilities. So we work really closely with a charity called Spectrum, who you may be aware of. They bring lots of families to our community night that have children with disabilities. That's been a key part of the event for a number of years and something we're really proud of. It also means a lot of our members that might have mobility issues or problems walking, that wouldn't want to walk in other areas when it's dark and in the winter, or might want to use one of our wheelchairs that we hire out, or mobility scooters, can also access the event. So that's kind of one aspect. The other aspect is that our site is of real historical significance, and the area of the orchard is one of the areas that has the least historical significance. So we just couldn't run this event in other parts of Anglesey Abbey's gardens because we wouldn't be able to get access to power. We wouldn't have the hard standing pavements. It would be really hard for us to put the event on and do it safely. But also the damage it would do would take months, possibly years to rectify. So we wouldn't be able to hold that annual event. And we know that even amongst our local neighbours in the village, many of them come to us regularly during the daytime and during normal operating hours, and it would ruin it for all those thousands of people that come every year. So that's the main two sort of reasons why we use the orchard.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Got another question after.
No, councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't quite catch your surname, Karen or something or other. Sorry about that.
I'm Karen Cochrane.
Cochrane. You mentioned there have been some concerns in the past and you rectified them. Are you able to say what the concerns were, and would there be any chance that they would be happening in the future if this was granted?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the reason we wanted to highlight that is because we've seen in some of the objections, and certainly on the consultation evening we held on the 2nd of November, a lot of the sort of strands to some of the objections are things that have happened quite a few years ago now. So we wanted to try and just clarify that. So for example, a number of people talk about traffic and parking problems, and that I know a number of years ago that was an issue on our sort of busiest days, but they didn't relate to these events. They didn't relate to the winter lights. And it was before a time when we had our new car park that's been in place for quite a few years now, but it predated that. We now ticket the event so that we don't have big peaks and troughs of people arriving at the busiest times, but people come at an allocated time. So for example, that's one example. We've had problems before where on one occasion some lights were left on all night. And we've said you'll see in the frequently asked questions document, we've said to the neighbours that this year we're happy to provide a mobile phone number to the event management team so that they've got a direct contact on the night. But also if, that was a one-off thing that happened, but were that to happen again, and we put lots of checks in to make sure that doesn't, but were something like that to happen again, we can respond to it straight away because we have key reps that live within a 5-minute walk of the site that respond to things 24/7. So there's a few things like that have cropped up in the objections, which we totally understand why those things would be a nuisance. But we would say that we've taken measures to rectify that. Things like the noise, we've started recording noise over the last few years now for events. So we take readings from the boundary, from the stage. We monitor that noise in response to people saying that things have been too noisy in the past, and we make sure that those volumes don't get turned up as soon as event staff move away. We put staff in that area to manage things as well. So there's quite a few things I'd say we've tried to learn from, and we're always open to learning more as well as we go on.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. The basic application is for films, and what sort of films will you be intending to show?
Thank you. So the honest answer is right now we don't know. We don't intend to show those films in the orchard. So we've added that because whilst we were adding to the license, we thought that would be something we'd like to do in the future. Other properties have very successfully run things like open air cinemas that have been very popular. In all likelihood is we would be doing that in the summer months where we could do it in areas further away from residents because the ground would be able to take that. If you come to an open cinema at Anglesey Abbey, you probably want a bit of the property in the backdrop and things like that. So it would be perfectly appropriate to do that in other parts of the gardens. So we've added that to the license application now as part of the variation. But in terms of the orchard, the use for the orchard is specifically relevant to the winter lights and to stop us having to keep submitting temporary licenses every year, as we have done for a number of years now.
Not showing films in the orchard?
No.
No, we've specifically said no to that, and it might. I've got lots of National Trust properties around where I live, and so I am very familiar with them putting on film events. And you go along with your family with your picnic, and they put on just great films, and you can sit outside and hope it doesn't rain, because that has happened to me. But I raised this when we were putting the application in, just because it was something I noticed wasn't on their license, and it might been as we were putting an application, and it seemed sensible to add that in should it be raised in the future. But my understanding is there's nothing planned to that effect, and certainly not in the orchard. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Stuart, have you got any questions at this stage? Not at this stage. Okay, if I can, I've got sorry, Maggie, you got one. You go first.
Sorry, Chairman, I didn't want to butt in. I just wanted to clarify. You said that you had some tens before. What were the hours for the tens? Because I've looked through the through the report that Stuart's done, but there's no indication anywhere of what the hours were. Were they the same? Were they up to 9:30? Were they 11:30? Were they?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. Exactly the same. So we're not looking to extend it any later. The event has always finished at 9:30.
So you're really literally just trying to regularize what you've been doing before.
Yeah, I think just to clarify that, I think really the main initial motivation for this was to reduce admin and just tidy things up from an administrative point of view. I can see how that set some hairs running, which we've then tried to speak to residents about. But that was the initial motivation. Yeah.
That's it, Maggie. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. You're talking about it running from 1 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. and the events finishing at 9:30. So what would be the setting up time and the packing up time around that?
To give you an example, the actual Winter Lights event, which is what we do every year in the Orchard, that doesn't actually run from 1 o'clock. So the earliest tickets. So the first members of the public that come in for that at 4:45 p.m. It's probably worth highlighting that during the day our grounds are open anyway, so the Orchard has things set up, but people can use the rest of the gardens anyway. So we have a sort of short turnaround where the last people leave site that have come as members or visitors for the day, and then we start the event at that time in the evening, so sort of tea time-ish. I guess just to sort of a bit of what's behind your question, I think just to explain, what we've tried to build into this application is a little bit of flexibility so that it's our biggest fundraiser. We're a charity. We rely on this income to help us do all the things we need to do. And we're very aware that when we started the Winter Lights event as a team of gardeners years ago, before we used professional contractors and so on, we were the first to do that. Winter Lights events have become quite popular now in lots of places. We see that ourselves, but we don't know that will last forever. So in making this sort of variation, we are just trying to give ourselves a bit of flexibility that in the future, if we needed to modify the style of the event or change the nature of it in the future, within the conditions that are given to us, that we would have a bit of flexibility to do that, and we wouldn't have to keep coming back to change things with you and sort of take up your time in this way every time.
No, if I can come back, what's behind my question obviously is because looking at the some of the comments from objectors, one you've touched on, which was about the lights being left on all night. But the other one is really if the event shuts at 9:30, I know a number of people have commented that they're packing up a lot later than that. So I'm just trying to get an idea of, or do you leave them the stuff in situ for the following night if you're running a 14-night event? Is really what's behind my question.
Yeah, so there will be a short period of time of packing away. So mainly in the Orchard, we have sort of food and beverage trailers and things like that, but they remain in situ for the entirety of the event. And one of the things we've looked to do this year is just try and bring the dates together so that we have less. We used to do it over a number of weekends, and we're now trying to bring 14 nights together so that we sort of minimize those challenges. It has sort of cost savings for us to do it that way as well. But essentially, yeah, those providers will come in, they'll set up their stalls and their trailers and so on. They will then just shut them down for the night at the end of the event and leave them there. And it won't be until the very last night that they will move them. So we don't have sort of things being transported in and out in that way. The only other sort of noise we have around that is clearly to set up, there's a period of probably an hour and a half beforehand where they need to bring in fresh provisions and so on. But all of the food and so on is prepared off site in people's restaurants and so on. And then they literally just bring it to serve from those trailers of an evening.
Sorry, did you want to? Next one is, Karen mentioned about a noise management plan. I know you touched on it, Martin. Just trying to get it, because again, that was one of the comments from residents was about noise. I'm just trying to get an idea what your noise management plan is if there is a situation where residents feel it's too loud. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
The suggestion came from, I saw some correspondence yesterday. So as we act for a number of large organisations with lots of premises. So we've got sort of draft noise management plans, and then you sort of fine tune them to the premises. I think it would be probably quite sensible to actually formulate that along with advice from public protection with regard to what would be appropriate to this site. So as I mentioned in my submissions, they angle the speakers in a particular way away from premises. They do sound checks. I think having people taking measurements around the boundary, but also by people's outside people's doors is something that's quite common. But it's something that I saw in the correspondence that was raised yesterday. I've discussed it this morning, and I think given there've been concerns, it would seem sensible, especially being as public protection are already involved and know all about it because of the safety advisory group meetings. It would seem sensible perhaps just to say there should be a noise management plan that's formulated following consultation with environmental health or something like that. If that helps, I don't know if there's anything.
No, I think Karen summarised it there. I think we're very willing to do whatever we need to do. We want to be good neighbours, so we're very willing to sort of formalise that, involve neighbours a bit more in some of that work. I guess, I think just to stress, it's an event that started probably on quite an amateur footing, and now we use real professional contractors that elsewhere are involved in things like Glastonbury and putting on professional productions and things. So we have the access to the technology, we have the expertise. It's probably just a case of formalising that. And I think perhaps some of the lessons that we've needed to learn in the past, by using those sorts of people now rather than delivering the event specifically ourselves with our own staff and volunteers, it means we're open to doing a lot more of those things. It's quite easy for us to sort of do that and suggest things in a noise management plan.
Thank you. I've got one question, one more, sorry, I'll let you in, Councillor Wilson. And it's partly a question for Stuart in some ways, because Martin, you touched on the films, that they weren't going to be part of the orchard, but you mentioned they could be used in the summer. Now, I know you've offered a conditions that there will be 19 events between the 1st of October and the 28th of February and no more. I'm just thinking, currently the licence covers certain parts of the grounds, but if we say we allowed this, then they could have the films in any part of the gardens, or am I misreading that really?
No, so the activities would be added to the existing license, so they would be able to occur anywhere on the original plans. Okay, and this condition would only restrict what's happening in the orchard to the 19 days. Now, as it currently stands, any activity could occur in there within 19 days, which would include films. Now, if members were minded to say, well, they don't want films in there from what the applicant said, then obviously it could be reworded slightly to exclude everything bar live music and alcohol, for example. But no, as it stands, the films could occur anywhere on the original plans, subject to the existing 28 conditions, because this additional condition is only affecting the orchard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that clarifies what I was trying to think. Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson.
What would you envisage as being the biggest difference that your neighbours will notice between what's happening now and what will happen if this licence is granted? What's the significant difference that they will be able to notice, and how you're going to mitigate that?
So I think in terms of the main event, the only event at the moment that we're planning in the orchard with our current resources is the Winter Lights event. The nature of the event will be exactly the same. It's fair to say that this year we've tried to increase the number of days a little bit from what we've done before. So I think previously we've had 12 nights. This year we're looking at 13 nights? 30 nights plus our community night, which is the same really. So let's say 14 nights. And really that's because the last few years we've just completely sold out of tickets very quickly. And we think adding those extra nights is a better way of sharing it rather than having more people come at the same time or trying to go later into the evening or anything like that. So in terms of the winter lights, it would be the same. I guess, like I say, we want to try and give ourselves a bit of flexibility in there, that we could do other events in the future if we wanted to, but then, as Karen said earlier, we could still apply for temporary licenses to do those in the current format anyway. And the condition that we've offered in the orchard means that we're actually looking to restrict that to 19 days. And if we went for temporary licenses, we could potentially do that for 26 days a year at any time throughout the year. So I think it doesn't feel, from our perspective, I understand why neighbours might have concerns, but from our perspective, it doesn't feel like we're asking to do anything substantially more or anything really different. We just want to build in a bit of flexibility to try and use things in the future. And we think this, in many ways, this might be better to do it in conjunction with them, with the condition that we've offered, than to keep submitting future temporary licenses. But the nature of the winter lights will be the same. It's the same event. It's not growing in size per night, or we're not looking to do new activities in the orchard that we haven't done there before as part of that event.
So are you saying then that basically you envisage that the objectors are really complaining about what you're doing at the moment, largely under the existing rules, and you know, if they're causing them a problem, how are you intending to sort out these problems that you seem to be already causing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we are saying that the event's pretty much the same. So if neighbours have got objections to those, then you're right. I guess they're voicing objections to the event as it is. I guess what we are constantly trying to do is strike a balance between raising the funds we need as a charity to pay for all the things we need to do and to keep the place as special as possible, which I know lots of our neighbours are members of ours and come to us regularly and enjoy. So, you know, we have to find those funds somehow. And we're trying to balance that off with being responsible neighbours and restricting the growth of the event and so on. And I think the way we've gone about this, I would argue, is for a really kind of sensible, transparent way, rather than doing lots of temporary licenses and doing lots of things just outside the boundary of the orchard, which, you know, we could look to do. We don't want to behave like that. We want to be really good neighbours. So I think personally, we had the meeting on the 2nd of November that I think really highlighted to me as general manager, I've been there just over a year, that our consultation with the village needs to improve. And I said that at the event, and we committed to coming up with a more regular consultation process with them, perhaps an annual or slightly more frequent than that if necessary, event where we invite people in, tell them about our future plans, hear what their concerns are, and we absolutely stand by that. So I think we can do that stuff better, and I hope that part of this process has kind of put that higher on my radar, certainly has. And I hope it's a sort of start of a process for things moving forward. But ultimately, I think you're right. A lot of the objections are to things that we have been doing anyway through and could continue to apply for temporary licenses to do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
I was going to mention the meeting on the 2nd of November and ask you if you was in consultation with the local residents about, but also following on from the meeting, did the local residents indicate anything that you could do that would make them happy and sort of rectify any disagreements with them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in your capacity as local councillors, you'll be aware of the challenges sometimes with consultations, because you speak to a lot of people. We invited about 80 households to the event. We had about 20 households attend. I guess that gives you an idea of figures compared to the number of objections that still remain. I think we've still got 5 and 1 that didn't respond to Stuart most recently. So it's always a challenge, isn't it? Because you ask people how they would prefer an event to run or something to run. And clearly people have different opinions. So for example, on the night, we had some people that said, we would much prefer you to do it how you used to do it, where you have a couple of nights of an event, then a big break in the week, then a couple of nights and so on. And then when we open that up to the room, there were other people in the room that said, no, absolutely not. I'd rather you put everything together, got it started and finished as soon as possible, and shorten the time that you're running things. So I think for me, what it highlighted is this whole process has highlighted that we could do our general ongoing consultation about our future plans and what we're trying to do and hear what the concerns are of neighbours better. And we're sort of committed to doing that. I think we listened really I think we did hear really strongly that the issue is about the orchard and the fear that we could do things in the orchard every night of the week, whatever we wanted to do, that would be all sorts, which is exactly why we volunteered the condition we are, to try and reassure people to restrict that. And we've just tried to give ourselves that bit of flexibility to do things in the future that we aren't currently doing, which we don't know at the moment, to give ourselves flexibility if an opportunity arises. But that's why we volunteered the condition, to try and reassure people that we're not looking to sort of make their lives hell or to sort of get things out of control.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Members, any other questions? No? Okay, in which case we move on to the objectors, and I'm looking at the list. I've got Chris Hammond. If you want to come forward, Chris, and as I say, please you put the mic on, and so everybody at home can hear what's being said. Thank you. Sorry, can you put the...
I'd like to just ask the chair, my neighbour John Hopkins from 51 wrote to say that he and his wife Michelle both have become COVID positive, and he has asked whether I could, after I make my submission, read out a statement that he's given to me, if that would be acceptable.
That is, I've got a note that you were doing that, so if you want to say what you're going to say, then
I'll do that.
If you then say going back and then coming forward, read the statement from Mr. Hopkins. Thank you.
So thank you. My name is Chris Hammond, owner occupier at 53 Mill Road, Lode, which directly adjoins the orchard at Anglesey Abbey. I object to the application as currently proposed to extend the licensable area at Anglesey Abbey to include the orchard, with addition of the condition as currently offered by National Trust. My reasons are detailed in my submission, and others have provided ample supplementary evidence in their submissions, but can be summarised as being on the grounds of A, public nuisance due to excessive noise, light pollution, litter and smell, and B, public safety due to fire risk. Extension of the winter lights event into the orchard has been allowed under temporary event notices for a number of years, and in that time there has been ample evidence of the nuisance caused by such events so close to housing in an otherwise quiet rural area. With that background, to grant licence to hold up to 19 separate events in the orchard, spanning a 5-month period of the year, as suggested in the NT profit condition, is simply unacceptable. NT has painted a picture where use of the orchard for events is pivotal to their fundraising activities. I do not agree. Using the winter lights just as an example. 1, the route passes the orchard, but does not go through it. It's about a mile long. Visitors are invited to pass through a gate and linger in the orchard. Having attended the event many times, I can attest that not all visitors accept that invitation. 2, NT has stated that use of the orchard for this purpose is necessary for accessibility reasons. My experience is that in wet weather, the area quickly becomes cut up, having personally stepped into mud above my ankles unseen in the dark. In past years, there has been music, including live performance, at other points on the route, and there are several possible alternative locations to site food concessions in dry, hard-surfaced areas. 3, I submit that when the cost of setup of the orchard, the cost of vendors and entertainers, and the additional management costs are accounted, the net income from food and alcohol sales in the orchard is likely marginal in relation to the overall event income. The NT has a history of licensable events held elsewhere in the grounds, well away from residential areas, both in Mill Road and elsewhere in the village. So, I submit that the use of the orchard, whilst attractive to the National Trust, is not fundamental to their ability to raise funds in addition to the entry fees to the house and gardens. In previous years, and more recently, immediate neighbours have tried to negotiate with NT regarding the winter lights setup by moving the noisier components further down the orchard or rotating the stage so that speakers face away from houses, but NT has simply refused to engage. These suggestions were designed to be minimum impact for National Trust, but with some creativity, it would even be possible to reverse the flow of the event and locate a much bigger and better serviced finale near the Abbey entrance, where there is ample hard standing power, water and toilet facilities, thus avoiding the need to use the orchard at all. Further, in a spirit of negotiation, we have suggested a form of wording for the condition which deals with our concerns and allows for the winter lights or similar events to use the orchard, and offered to discuss each point seeking a fair compromise, but without success. The application and process has revealed, I believe, National Trust's true ambition to develop the orchard as an event and catering space. This will create unacceptable and unnecessary public nuisance and risk to public safety, given the proximity of the orchard to housing and the wide range of alternatives open to National Trust at Anglesey Abbey. I therefore respectfully, 1, ask that the committee reject the National Trust application as originally submitted. 2, further ask that the committee reject the application with the addition of the condition currently proposed by the National Trust. 3, if the committee is minded to grant the application in some form, I respectfully ask that they impose the following 3 conditions. A, first, a condition that limits the orchard to the month of December and a maximum of 14 nights, thus allowing the winter lights this year to proceed and allowing for alternative future events to include the orchard. If more event nights and or a longer period are granted, then I request that the number of separate licensable events that can use the orchard in each calendar year should be limited to 2. This to prevent the spectre of 19 separate events as would be allowed under the current condition. B, a second condition that limits licensable events to the orchard to 1 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, as is suggested in the current application, but to 8:30 p.m. on school nights, Sunday through Thursday. This in a move to help those of my neighbours who have young children or those of school age. C, a third and final condition which strictly limits noise from events in the orchard and places a requirement on the National Trust to ensure that those limits are not exceeded, similar to those that are imposed on other licensees in the village. In closing, I would like to say it is disappointing that National Trust has planned, promoted and sold tickets to an event for which they do not hold the proper permissions, placing neighbours and this subcommittee in a difficult position. I also regret that the National Trust approach to this application has limited the time and opportunity for detailed discussion and proper negotiation. As a life member and regular user of National Trust properties and land, I strongly support their work. However, I do not believe that this application to use the orchard for licensable events over 5 months of the year in close proximity to residential housing is consistent with what I believe are the values and aims of the organisation. Thank you again to the Chair for the opportunity to speak on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Members, any questions of Mr. Hammond at this stage? No, in which case, thank you, Mr. Hammond. We move to Martin Lord. Sorry. Oh, sorry, apologies. Yes, you read out the statement from John Hopkins. Yeah, thank you.
This is a written statement given to me by my neighbour, John Hopkins and Michelle Hopkins, who live at number 51 Mill Road. John has asked me to explain why they're unable to attend the meeting, and we've done that. And then I'm going to read out what he wrote. 1, conflict of interest. This question has already been raised on the agenda, but for the avoidance of doubt, would the members of the subcommittee please state whether they belong to National Trust, and if they do, should they not declare an interest and recluse themselves from participating in the decision? 2, failure of the National Trust to consider the licensing objectives. Paragraph 8.44 of the Home Office Guidance to the Licensing Act 2003 states that in its application, an applicant must demonstrate that it has considered all of the licensing objectives and the steps it has taken to achieve them. Apart from the initial proposal to limit the time of day during which activities can take place in the orchard, the application is silent on how the public nuisance objective is to be achieved. This is indicative of the National Trust's approach to the whole question of the application. It has proceeded on the basis that it ought to be able to do more or less whatever it likes in the orchard, without regard to the effect this could have on the adjoining landowners. Our right to live in peace and quiet and not to be subject to light pollution and unpleasant odours has been ignored. The proximity of the orchard to residential premises is such that the National Trust ought to have put forward positive proposals on how it will manage any potential risks, brackets para 8.43, and this it has totally failed to do. 3. Failure to consult. The Home Office guidance also makes it clear that before lodging a licence application, an applicant ought to consider whether there are likely to be any objections and, if there are, to carry out a consultation exercise in an attempt to forestall them. Contrary to what is stated in the application, no such consultation took place, even though, as the General Manager of Anglesey Abbey admitted at the meeting which he held on the 2nd of November, the decision to run this year's Winter Lights event over a continuous period of 2 weeks was taken months ago. It is specious of him to suggest, therefore, in the FAQs, that the application to vary the existing licence is simply a tidying up exercise, when in fact the planned event would not be able to proceed without an alteration to the licence so as to include the orchard. The National Trust is in a hole and is relying on the subcommittee to extricate it. 4. Failure to compromise. The attitude of the National Trust throughout this whole episode has been one of arrogance. At the meeting on 2nd of December, the General Manager of the Abbey said he thought that everyone was in favour of Winter Lights event because in previous years it had gone ahead without any objections. Whereas in fact, in the past, it has been authorised by means of temporary event notices, and therefore no member of the public had a say in the matter. When local residents sought to put forward a suggested compromise at the meeting to move the event away from the boundary with the orchard, it was rejected out of hand. In an attempt to answer the representations and satisfy the objections to its application, the National Trust has volunteered a condition to restrict the use of the orchard to a limited number of days over the winter period. However, this would still result in a substantial increase in the number of days over a much extended period to which the residents of the properties that adjoin the orchard would potentially be subject to noise, light, pollution and smell. In an attempt to reach a compromise yesterday, my neighbours and I put forward an alternative proposed condition that in essence would have allowed the Winter Lights to go ahead, much as in previous years. We also offered to meet the General Manager of the Abbey in the hope of being able to reach a mutually acceptable solution. The proposal was rejected, as was the offer of a meeting, because he was too busy. 5. Conclusion. We urge the members of the subcommittee to put themselves in our shoes and consider whether they would be happy to have events taking place at the end of their garden throughout the winter months. As we have said in our representations, for us, Winter Lights is like living next to a fun fair, and to have to put up with that for a fortnight without a break is totally unreasonable. As the Home Office guidance states in paragraph 2.18, the approach to noise nuisance should be one of prevention, and therefore the application should either be refused on the grounds that this would be appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, brackets para 9.4, or at the very least curtailed, as we and our neighbours have proposed. That way the Abbey would be able to continue with the Winter Lights and we would get some respite from their impact. So for the avoidance of doubt, that statement I've just read is from John Hopkins and Michelle Hopkins from number 51 Mill Road. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hammond. Obviously, we can't question Mr. Hopkins, so thank you for reading that statement out.
Mr. Hopkins has given me copies which are available if any members of the subcommittee would like to take them, and I'll also leave here copies of what I have said today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Right, now move to Martin Lord, if you want to come forward. Obviously, want everybody to feel they've had their say, so they've got all of their points across, but at the same time, I'm conscious that some of the items are, may be repeated. So if we can try to avoid that, I'll be grateful for that. But at the same time, I want to make sure everybody's had a fair hearing.
Mr. Chairman, committee, can you hear me all right? Thank you very much.
We can, yes.
My name's Martin Lord. I'm a chartered structural engineer. I've served on various charities at various times through my career, including the Institution of Structural Engineers, Neighbourhood Watch, which is how I know some of you, for 12 years, and also the Court of Cranfield University. So I have, and as well as a rather large charity in Northamptonshire, which is Rushden Historical Transport Society, which is a licence holder not only for their premises at the railway station, but also for holding a cavalcade in a local farm, which is a big licensable event. And we have a licensed side, a charitable side, and we have a limited company, which is the trading arm. So I can understand the dilemma on the right to me we've had today. My neighbours, as you probably were aware, have stolen all my thunder, and my speech has just gone out the window. I'd like to raise 2 points, if I may, which might be useful. The first one particularly is that we have 4 licence holders in the parish. One is on the fen in respect of the polo area that now Prince of Wales used to frequent, and the other 3 are in and around the village, namely to the south of us and to the east and west is Anglesey Abbey, which we're talking about today. To the east, we have the Shed Public House and Restaurant on Lode Road, and behind us to the north, we have the Lodestar Festival, which has an immense sound stage bigger than this room, for a lot of amplifiers. That sound stage is particularly orientated to point away from the village and from all the houses and residents as much as it can possibly done. And the licensee spends a lot of time and effort, both before and after the event, in monitoring sound levels, to the extent that I can stand outside the front of my house, which faces in the direction of the Lodestar Festival, and I can barely hear it. The problem in the past, and our poor manager here, who was the 3rd manager and he's only been in harness about a year, has really had to adopt, shall I say, the benefits and sins of the 1st manager who set the Winter Lights event up. There are clearly some problems with the format and template of it that's been discussed today. One is obviously noise nuisance, and there is a big screen of trees that are between our properties and the orchard. So the performers can't really see us, but the sound goes straight through. That's fundamentally the problem, lack of view. So much so that when the Winter Lights event first started in 2011, because it was planned in 2010, I couldn't hear my own television in my own house. I had to turn the volume up. That's completely unacceptable. And so I bought a sound meter and started to get into sound levels, and with some of my other colleagues are into it as well. It would be logically sensible to, across the 3 licence holders that we have around the village, to actually bring them into parity now and update the current application that's in front of you, which is possibly getting a little bit dated in terms of settings or some criteria that are more scientific for monitoring the sound levels and establish acceptable standards. So again, we can't hear it in the houses. In 2010, there was a DEFRA publication brought out for the noise policy statement for England. Stuart is probably aware of it. Yes, right. Certainly is what it ought to be. Now, if we take as an example one of the other licensees and we look at their criteria for their noise levels, these might be rather useful to the committee to bear in mind if they're considering putting on another condition as regards monitoring and controlling sound nuisance. I refer to documents which is East Northants reference 16/00506 full, which is the planning permission, which normally preclude licensing in my experience. And upon that, there is item 5 and 6. May I read them to you, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, you can, but obviously we're not veering into planning here.
No, this is in respect. Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is in respect of control of noise nuisance, right? I'm sure Stuart would understand it, and if he weighs me down, I'll stop. 5, the LAQ entertainment noise level should not exceed LA 90 representative background noise level without the entertainment noise when measured and or calculated at 1 metre from the facade of any noise sensitive premises. Familiar to you, Stuart? Reason to safeguard residential amenity of neighbouring occupiers. 6, L10 entertainment noise level should not exceed L90 representative background noise level without the entertainment noise in any 1/3 octave band between 40 Hertz and 160 Hertz when measured and or calculated at 1 metre from the facade of any noise sensitive premises. Now, I think if that was incorporated into the conditions of the application in front of us today, that would be sensible and bring all the licenses into parity. And I think it'll probably deal with our problem from my experience of taking sound levels both in the house and outside the house, and in conjunction with the previous manager's attempt to actually start to formulate an operable noise management plan. Don't know why that hasn't continued now by the appearance of it into a plan that is actually in front of us after 10 years of temporary event notices. But that's water under the bridge. Let's see what's in front of us and what we can solve today. As regards planning, I can't find anything other than planning consent for the restaurant at Anglesey Abbey, and would ask that the committee defer to planning in due course and ask them to review the planning consents. And I think that's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lord. Members, any questions?
No questions, Chair. Obviously, Martin raised some points there, which I just wanted to really clarify that within this authority, licensing is very much licensing. Some of the points there about the technicalities of decibel levels, etc., are dealt with by our professionals in environmental health who have their degrees in environmental services, and it's something which licensing would obviously sort of bow to their superior knowledge of. From our point of view, we very much skirt around the periphery of that side of things. The general gist of it is that the applicant has to show that they are not going to have a detrimental impact on those objectives. And some of the points which have been raised about, I think, raised about an absolute right to peace and quiet. I do know there is no such thing as that. Nobody has an absolute right to light or an absolute right to peace and quiet. There has to. It's whether or not it's considered to be a nuisance in a public sense, which has its widest remit in that way. So it's just really to sort of clarify that. I mean, another point which was raised was about the need of the applicant to state ways that they're going to promote the objectives. As much as it's stated in the guidance that they should consider these facts, because this is a variation and the existing 28 conditions will migrate and remain in place, then what we have to assume is that when the applicant placed the application, that they believe that those 28 conditions that were already there were going to uphold the objectives and nothing more was required. So I just wanted to sort of clarify on that point. And one final other point which has been raised is about the temporary event notice aspect and intent to hold things. We are aware there's some tends that have come in for this year's event. We have explained the limitations on those in that there has to be a 24-hour gap between the two 7-day periods. And the National Trust are obviously well, they've been made aware of that fact, and they will be taking steps to ensure that the event, if this license is not granted, that it will run on the tens and it will be run lawfully. And they've had that advice from licensing. So just points I just wanted to clarify for you, Chair.
I've just got one question. I do know the area reasonably well. You mentioned about the screen of trees. Does that in some ways help mitigate the noise?
No, Mr. Chairman, trees don't. If in a single row of trees like this in front of you, they don't really much make attenuation at all. If you turn the soundstage, which always faces the houses, i.e. faces due north, and turn it through 90 degrees, it then faces into the woods and the woods beyond towards Horningsea, some distance away. That would then also present the sound stage to a wider and longer dimension for the audience as well. So I think that would be a sensible update for the applicant to consider.
I'm seeing some, if I can try and get some clarity on this, because I'm seeing some, the fake, which direction is the noise stage going to face?
Yeah, so it's probably worth just highlighting. We try and put the stage sort of further back from the houses, so it's not right up against the boundary. We put it further back, and then it's kind of all the other food items and so on are between the houses and the so we put it as far back as we feel we can away from the houses. All of the speakers are directed away from the houses purposely. They're definitely not directed towards the houses. It's in the opposite direction.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions of Mr. Law? Sorry, you wanted to come back?
If you look at condition 24 on the current licence, it reads subjectively, not scientifically, which is why I made my proposal and suggestion to you as the example from another licence holder. I hope that's useful. And I think that's Mr. Lord over and out, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. I've now got Sarah Freed. If Sarah would like to come forward. As before, if you can use the microphone, Sarah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm Sarah Freed. I'm here with my husband, Sharon Freed, and we live at number 57 Mill Road.
I've also got a note that you're representing Louise Foreman as well. Are you going to say anything on her behalf, or would it be included within what you're going to say?
It's included in what
Okay,
I'm going to
thank
say. Okay. Firstly, we want to say that we fully support Anglesey Abbey in their desire to run events, including the Winter Lights, and increase revenue for their charity. My husband and I are both small business owners and understand this completely. What we strongly oppose is the use of the land closest to residents' properties when they have a host of other possible sites that would not cause any impact to the community. By redefining the Winter of Lights event this year, they have shown a total disregard for the impact on their closest neighbours. No consideration or consultation whatsoever. Then applying for the licence retrospectively, we feel places a lot of pressure on the council to vote in their favour so the event can still go ahead, and on us as residents who, given the opportunity to be heard, would have opposed it. Quite simply, we feel they've messed up. For years, we've put up with the disturbance caused by the Winter Lights event. Until this application, we've never had an opportunity to formally oppose it. We've not had an opportunity to speak up and use our voices. As a psychotherapist of 20 years, this is an area of expertise for me. The importance of having a voice. It feels very much that the National Trust are a huge organisation with a lot of influence, and we are a few lowly voices speaking up against them. So to be absolutely clear, we have never been consulted by them on any issue. We only discovered the Winter Lights event had been extended to 14 consecutive nights via their poster advertising the event. And we only discovered their application for a permanent licence for the Orchard area by chance. It felt like an attempt to fly under the radar to avoid community scrutiny. Fast forward to the meeting last week held by Anglesey Abbey for local residents. We feel that this was only called because they had been backed into a corner by this application process and began to understand the strong opposition felt by the community. The meeting was not a consultation. It was not even really a discussion. Our main collective objections were listed, the main one being the use of the orchard, and justification was given for each one. It became crystal clear that from their perspective, they are not prepared to be flexible to discuss using a different area of their vast property for events. They have their sights set on the orchard. That is non-negotiable, and we have no choice but to shut up and put up with it. We voiced suggestions of other possible areas, but it was clear they have no intention of investigating or investing in exploring this. So that's why my husband and I felt it was so important to be here to speak up today. We don't have a choice. We live where we live, on the doorstep of Anglesey Abbey, a fact that mostly we feel incredibly blessed by. But this whole saga has tainted that, and we feel we are being bullied into submission. As a family, we are very concerned. We have 2 school-aged children, and as for many families, the last 3 years have been extremely tough. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just going to have to take a drink for a moment. Our 15-year-old daughter has special needs, including sensory issues, and is classed as vulnerable. And our 13-year-old son has been diagnosed with long COVID. Their bedrooms are at the back of the house, overlooking the orchard area. To paint a picture of how the winter lights impact us, imagine night after night, bright lights lighting up the area, smells of food drifting into the house every time we open the door to let the dog in or out. The event has several entry time slots every evening, so each time a new group enters the orchard, the same music plays on and on, time after time, night after night. It feels like being under siege in your own home. This year, that will be for 14 consecutive nights. Our daughter with sensory issues is particularly affected by all of this disturbance, and we simply have no way of escaping it. Having said all of this, we appreciate that the upcoming Winter Lights event has been advertised and tickets sold. So reluctantly, we accept that this will most likely go ahead now. We are prepared to compromise in this. However, we don't feel the National Trust is prepared to compromise at all, refusing to even consider our request that they move the bulk of the event to the farthest side of the orchard, away from our properties. We will be the ones suffering due to what we see as their messing up, not them. Our ultimate concern is that if they get the licence approved today, they will begin to invest in the orchard area's infrastructure and apply for temporary licenses to hold more events. We would not have any control over this, and we worry that today is the tip of the iceberg, and they have ambition to develop this area for more future events. Their response to this is no other plans at the moment, but for how long? In winter, at least doors and windows are closed and we're not using the garden. Summer events would cause more disruption. To finish, we want you to hold in your mind the proximity of the orchard to us, which measures approximately 30 metres from our living room. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Members, any question? Councillor Edwards. Can you put your mic on, please?
Sorry about that. Can I ask if you've had calls in the past to make official complaints either to East Cambs Council, the licensing department, following any other events that have been held there?
We haven't made official complaints, no, but we have had to ask them to turn down the music on a couple of occasions. yeah, but we haven't made official complaints.
If I can come back in on that, what's been, if you've asked them to turn the music down a couple of times, what's been the reaction or action? if any?
I think, I mean, it was my husband actually who did that. So I don't know. I think on one occasion we couldn't find anyone.
If you want to come forward, Mr.
Yeah.
Steve.
Thank you. My name is Sharon from 57 Mill Road. On a few times, and not only at one event, on a few different events, different years, I had to go up to the visitor center and complain, and been asked that they turn the music down. It was more than once, even once. I think they offered to give me a plant for my inconvenience from their shop.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, any questions? No. Yes, did you? Councillor Wilson.
Did they actually turn the music down when you complained about it?
They did temporarily, but the issue is that what it feels like, they don't have somebody actually there to monitor. So as soon as somebody walks away, the performer might think, oh, I'm not loud enough, and then turn it back up again. And the background music is the one that is constant playing. You can't avoid not hearing it when you're 30 meters away. And it's coming from a speaker.
No. Okay, well, thank you for that, Mr. and Mrs. Steed. Thank you. I now move back to the applicant really to if they want to say any words in summing up that they wish to bring to our attention.
Just briefly, if I could, as has been mentioned, there are already 28 conditions on this licence. I think much of the criticism that's been given to us is a little unfair, in as much as the reason you wouldn't fill boxes in a form out when there's already 28 conditions on the licence. It's been suggested that we're trying to avoid scrutiny, and again, I'm not quite sure what today is. I just like to sort of put on record, it's a little upsetting to be for it to be suggested that people are being bullied. That's absolutely not where the National Trust is. There are 28 conditions on the licence already. There are responsible licence holder who do promote the licensing objectives. They have a late licence on a massive area. They did do some public consultation. This is part of a consultation. There are temporary event notices that can go ahead. To say that, you know, that they've just ignored the process is unkind. There's all sorts of speculation being made about safety and lots of other issues which are looked at in great detail by the Safety Advisory Group. The application's gone to the fire service, to environmental health, to the police, to the planning department. All of those people who have expertise have no issue with what's being proposed. The National Trust have listened to what has been said. They have limited use of this area significantly. We're not asking for 365 days a year. We're looking at 19 days with limitations on hours. I've suggested today that a noise management plan in consultation with environmental health would be a very sensible step forward. I anticipate that it may well be that there have been issues in the past that have caused these problems and people then become very sensitized. But the Trust want to work very closely with their neighbours, and I'm sure with this whole process, lots of steps can be looked at and consideration taken with regard to the events are held. And as I started, I think limiting it to a number of days in a year, to limit it to a particular times is a sensible way forward. And I would ask you to consider our application. I don't know if there's anything else you can add. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Members, any final questions? Gareth.
Have you considered noise limiters? Because I believe you can get this so that if an individual performer is putting the noise up because he feels he likes it loud, you can actually, as organisers, actually control it so that if the noise goes too high, his electricity cuts out.
Yeah, so we haven't actually done that, but we do now manage that process far better than we would have done in the past. So I totally accept, speaking to my team, that has happened in the past with performers managing their own noise. That doesn't happen anymore. So we always have members of staff and volunteers that are all radioed up to the event management team stationed in that area at all times. Our contractor measures the sound at various times throughout the evening. My honest opinion is that that's something that we could have done better in the past, but we've now rectified, and you know, we're happy to formalise as part of a noise management plan as suggested. I don't think that, you know, the type of performers we have and anyway wouldn't really warrant that, but I think the measures we now take have stopped that from happening. I think the only other thing to add is we have said as well that we will provide residents with a mobile phone number for the event lead team every time we've got an event. So again, hopefully people don't have to frog march around to the visitor centre in future. They can dial that number. It'll be a mobile phone that someone will be able to respond to and coordinate a response to straight away. So we do take it really seriously, the concerns. You know, I am very conscious of people's lives living in houses and their own circumstances near us, and we are committed to trying to improve that as much as we can.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question of the application, but from my own point of view, from a service looking forward, how many people normally come to for each of your ticketed events? How many people attend per night?
Sorry, can you repeat that to the mics so people watching the live stream can pick it up? Thank you.
So each evening we have a total of 2,600 tickets available to the public. So over what is 13 nights that are available to the public, if every night was sold out, that would be 35,000 visitors overall.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps just for all parties' benefit, really, your engagement with the SAG, the Safety Advisory Group, for the winter lights, how extensive is that? Do you end up with an event management plan, which a noise management plan forms a part of, or is it more a general sort of low-level discussion? If you can just probably explain.
A bit of both. So the consultation with the Safety Advisory Group happens during the process of creating an event management plan, so that their advice goes directly into it. They see a draft copy, they feed back to us, and that then feeds into the finalised version of the event management plan. Sort of the next steps beyond that, a lady called Karen C, who you may be aware of, is directly supporting us not only with the next steps from her consultation with making the event management plan, but the snag night that we alluded to earlier on, which happens before any launch night, any community nights. We also have invited Karen, and we plan to have her with us on that night so she can see firsthand the noise management measures that we put in place in terms of like decibel recording, the sound checks that we go through with the music artists, the positioning of speakers as well, which has been spoken about. So it's not just Anglesey Abbey staff and the event management contractors that we work with that do event like music events within Cambridge and at Glastonbury and larger scale events. But we've also got a member of the safety advisory group there to sort of look at these measures as well and to provide any further advice.
Thank you. I just thought it'd be useful for members to understand the process that goes on with the safety advisory.
Yeah, sorry.
Could I just add just briefly to the context of that? Thank you for that. I think the other thing just worth mentioning is that just the context of the type of operation we are, even outside of these events. So we have nearly 400,000 visitors a year. We're open 362 days a year. We have really kind of lots of expertise within the trust. We have ongoing links with fire service, police. We meet regularly. We have salvage plans because of our historical collection and so on. So I just wanted to put that context that this isn't an event in isolation that we're putting on like some of the other events in the local area where that's all they do in that field for that year or something. We have all those links. We have those relationships. There's a lot of expertise and thinking that goes into these things in our decision making. So we do that for the event, as James has articulated really well there, but it's within the context of, you know, an operation where we're getting thousands of visitors every day coming to experience the gardens and the house.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to explain, Karen C is an environmental health officer within the council, just for the benefit of the tape. Members, any more questions? No? In which case, I'm going to go to applicants, and then do you feel you've been able to put across everything you wanted to say today?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And similarly to Mr. Hammond, Mr. and Mrs. Steed and Mr. Lord, are you happy you've been able to put across all the points you wanted to raise? Yes. Okay. In which case, what will happen? Sorry, Mr. Lord.
Mr. Chairman, I'm rather heartened to hear that a noise management plan is now coming to fruition after 10 years. And I hope within that plan, there'll be the scientific measurements that I've suggested. Then the licensee comes into parity with the other licenses in the village. And I think that would be a good move forward. I look forward to being able to listen to my television without having to go around every year or second year and ask the manager to turn the speakers through 90 degrees and turn the volume down. So moving the soundstage round 90 degrees and considering that be a very good start for the noise management plan, particularly if you look at templates for noise management plans. So that's rather heartening. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward in hope to an improvement.
Okay, thank you for that. What will happen now is we will go into closed session with only Maggie, who's the legal advisor, to make sure whatever decision we come up is legally sound. We won't have Stuart in the room either. The decision is made by the three of us. And as I say, we've got, under the Act, we've got 5 days to notify that decision. So obviously what we would have to agree the wording, because obviously whatever we decide is subject to obviously legal challenge. So so thank you everybody for your time. Thank you to the members of public and the press who are watching online, and I declare the subcommittee closed. Thank you.